All right, it is 6:05 p.m. Central Time, Thursday, October 19th. This is session 6 of the Intro to Coding Live JavaScript course. So we only have one topic to cover tonight as far as slides, and there's only a couple of slides on it. And basically tonight we are going to talk about higher order functions. And a higher order function is a function that operates on other functions, either by taking them as arguments or by returning them. And there, I don't know why I have that there. Sorry. And so with the higher order function, basically it allows us to have greater flexibility. You will see this is an instance of a higher order function where we are actually passing in the function as a parameter. And we can take a look at recreating this in our replit. So if we say something along the lines of, let's say we'll just do let add equal a b, and we return a plus b. All right, and then we can console.log add 5 and 4, and if we run this, we get 9. Right, and along the same lines here, so we could do something like let multiply equal same thing a b, and then we can return a times b. All right, and same thing here, console.log, and we can do multiply, and we'll do 10 and 5, and over here I'd expect to see 50. Now I can build out these smaller individual functions and then use another larger function to help control which one I'm using, right? So like I could build something called calculator, right? So instead of having to call add directly and multiply directly, I can, and again, we only have 2 things, but if, let's say if we were to build out like all of the functions of a scientific calculator, or even like a graphing calculator, if we want to get more complicated, then to encapsulate all of that, we wouldn't necessarily give our users direct access to each individual function. We'd probably give them access to a function that would be called calculator, right? So we could say let calculator, right? And then here we can say A and B, and then also the operation, we'll call it, right? And so now in here, sorry, we can do something like return operation A, B, right? And this is just a parameter name, just like A is, just like B is. And so now when I call calculator, I actually have to give it what operation I want to use as well. So I can do something like console.log calculator, right? And so we've got some things going on here. And let's see here. So we could say 5 and 10, and we'll do add, right? And what I would expect to see here is 15 be the response for this, right? And there's my 15. And if I were to change this to multiply, right, I get 50. So 5 times 10 is 50. And so what happens when we call calculator and we have these parameters given to it, right? So like A becomes 5, B becomes 10, and operation becomes multiply, right? And then same thing down here on this line, right? It's multiply 5, 10, right? Is what this resolves to. And that's all a higher order function is a function that takes in another function or returns it. This one in this case does both, right? So we're taking in the function up here and then we're returning it down here. Right, so here in this example, it's basically the same thing. We just call it arithmetic, and we've got 2, 3, and add, and what we would expect to see is add num 1 and 2, which turns into add 2, 3, which then the final result of that is 5. All right, and that's all there is for tonight on higher order functions as far as any type of like slides or anything like that. Does anyone have any questions about what I just displayed?
So what would be like a practical use of that? Can you like pull up an example, like why we would do that? I don't know.
Um, so I don't write a lot of functional programming, so I don't know how often it would get used, but like when writing vanilla JavaScript, and this is vanilla JavaScript, but when I work with the React front end framework, and one of the core things of React is passing properties around. And a lot of times those properties are functions, right? And so basically you won't necessarily do it when you're solving algorithms, but when you start working within frameworks, like basically passing a function as a property to something else, or like having a function call another function is very common. So it gets used all over the place when you start doing the object-oriented programming and you're starting to do the encapsulation, right? Where you keep your code organized and segregated depending on what it does. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
right. And so it's harder to conceptualize why you would do this when like we do these little ones, but as your code gets bigger and more complex, you will see more and more higher order functions. Right. And a lot of our built-ins. So like yesterday we did some I demonstrated like how to do .map, and that has a callback function. So .map is a built-in function that then uses a callback function inside of it. So technically a higher order function as well. So you'll see them all over the place. You just don't usually see it for examples this simple. Like we wouldn't necessarily do something like this.
So I have a question. When I feel like I need to do this, sometimes I don't understand if I'm supposed to be putting the function in as a parameter or as an argument. I don't know why that gets me confused sometimes. Can it sometimes be the parameter and sometimes the argument, your function that you write?
Well, so I'm not sure by like argument. I mean, we're this function, like calculator, takes 3 params, right? A, B, and operation. And so we've got, without knowing this, like this would be a number, this would be a number, and then this is going to be another function that we have. So I guess I would ask, like, what do you mean by argument?
Yeah, I guess exactly what you said. So in the front of the function, you would put the other function in those parentheses, or would you call it at the end of the function?
Well, right. So this is like I'm returning the function here, right? But I don't necessarily have to, right? Like I could assign this to a variable. So I could say, let answer equal this and then return answer, right? I could do different things in here, right? Like I could make this so that right, like if I wanted to start getting more complicated, like I could say like operations and make it an array, and then I could actually, I don't have to show it as an array here, but like I could do something like this, right, where I say multiply, multiply, add, and depending on what I put in here, like it will do all of them in that order. Like if I wanted to make something unnecessarily complicated, right? But they're just params. And then the param is replaced by whatever you give it in the function call.
Okay, I think it's probably just going to take experience doing it and doing it. It just confuses. It looks really clear here, but then when I'm trying to figure out how to put it together on the other side, initiating it, it seems so much harder.
Well, initiating it is down here, right? And so it's just like add and multiply, right? So like if we just ignore this completely for right now, right? So when we call add or we call multiply, we've got A and B. And let me do this here real quick too. Let me do, and let's make this a little bit more descriptive, right? So we've got num1 and num2. And num1 and num2 are just placeholders, right? They're parameters, they're just names, and nothing happens here, right? So if I don't ever call add never gets used for anything. And it's just some code, like the computer stores it in memory and then it never does anything with it. And once the program is done running, it dumps it out of memory. And so this code up here is not activated until I give it a function call down here. Right. And so, and we haven't looked at it yet because we're still, like I said, we're writing basic vanilla JavaScript, but like when you start getting more into looking at JavaScript for web applications, right? Like there are things that bind your keystrokes and your mouse clicks. Like in JavaScript, there's something called onClick, which is a built-in function in JavaScript that recognizes when someone clicks a mouse, something happens, right? So a button will have a property that says onClick, right? So I could say something like button and say click here, right? And that's my button. And then there's a property in here that says onClick. And then for onClick, there would be something right here that then says add, right? And then we would say num1, num2, and we would define num1, num2 in the form up above. And when I click on that button, this method calls my add method, which is written in the code. The user can't see this, but when it clicks on the button, it goes up there and it executes this code. And it doesn't execute the code until someone clicks on the button, right? I mean, that's every button in the world, like on the web, if it does something, there is a property on it that is basically telling it what's going to happen when someone clicks on it, right? Like, can we get really far into this, but like this one, there's an anchor tag on the button that's saying, if you click this button, go here, right? And like if you get into the form where it says like buy or submit or whatever, like there's going to be some other type of action tied to that button. But like nothing happens until someone takes that action, because we're still learning the basics. We're still using the console over here, right? So like when you're clicking around on Amazon, nothing's going to the console unless there's an error, and then there's probably error messages or warnings getting spit out into the console that their developers can use to troubleshoot the website. But like none of your information that you're inputting or clicking on is actually going to the console. We don't use that once we start writing production code. Like this is just for learning or for debugging code on our end. And so like most of the time you won't see console.logs, like you'll just see add, right? Or the call for multiply. And the computer is doing something, it's just not displaying it in the console. But because we want to see it in the console, that's why we have those there.
Sure.
But
It makes perfect sense when you have it written out and I understand it. It's
Do you
just
have an
when-
example of what's like what you're looking at that's confusing you, or if you've got some code somewhere else we could take a look at?
I'm trying to do the questions on the test, and I guess there's a couple where it seems like I'm going to have to write a function and put it inside of another function that I wrote. And I don't know, I get confused on whether I write the function and I put it in as a parameter or as an argument. I'm not really sure. I don't know if that's something that is confusing to everybody at first and it just takes time, or if I'm kind of alone on this.
So I think I understand what you're saying now. And so this is, again, let me get rid of this and we'll uncomment this. Like, same thing I was talking about with Pia, like this is for basically like demonstration purposes, right? Like I wouldn't necessarily do something like this.
Right.
And yesterday we talked about global scope and local scope, right? Now, this gives me the flexibility to call my calculator function and give it different functions and turn this into a higher order function. Now, if you are writing something that needs to like call on another function and that it only needs to call that other function, that's it, just one other function, it's never going to call another function. They're both out there at the global scope, right? So I could write a function that says like let add and multiply equal num1 and num2, and I'm not giving it, I'm not turning this into like I'm not giving the function as a parameter, but what I can do in here is I can say return add num1 plus num2, right? Plus multiply num1 plus num2. All right. And so now when I call console.log add and multiply, right, and I give it 5 and 5, I should get 5 plus 5 is 10 plus 5 times whoops. I didn't mean to add plus symbols there. That's going to throw an error. There we go. Plus 5 times 5, right? So I would hope that I would see 35 over here when I run this. Oh, return multiply is not defined. Did I make a mistake here? Did I just spelled it wrong? So I did. There we go. There's our 35, right? So these are at the global scope. So if you're writing a function that is then calling on another function and they're both up at the global scope, you don't necessarily have to pass it in as a parameter on the top, right? But if you're writing a function that can take in a bunch of different functions and you want to make it reusable, then you can build it or write it so that the function gets passed in as a parameter. And then when you call it, you can choose which other function you want to give it, right? But if you're just writing two functions to help keep your code organized, and one function is just calling the other function, and they're both at the global scope, then you don't need to pass it in as a parameter.
So in line 10 there, where you've got return add, and that's the function, do you always want to put num1, num2, the same thing that you put up in line 1, num2, num1, num2? Same thing for multiply, you want to use the same num1, num2, the same thing you used up on line 5?
In not every time, but in this instance, yes. Right? Like these don't matter, right? Like, I mean, they matter in and of the fact that like I'm just writing a function that adds and multiplies two numbers that you give it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for this, yes, but depending on the one that you're writing, you may or may not need to pass it like the same params over and over again. right? But for this instance, yes, like I just made it as easy as possible, right? Like I could make it more complicated, right? And do something like this. And now it down here, like I can say 5 and 5 and 10 and 10, and now I would expect to see 110, right? Because I did 5 plus 5 plus 10 times 10.
Okay, so it just needs to be the same type. It doesn't have to have the same variable name.
Well, it doesn't, when you say type, like I'm thinking data type, like integer, it
Yeah,
needs to have the same type because I'm specifically doing math.
sure.
But like these could be strings, these could be like arrays, they could be objects, right? Like whatever we could think of, right? Like anything can be passed in as a parameter, it just depends on what you're trying to do. I'm just using numbers here because they're easy.
Sure. Okay. But if you set the original one up like in line 1, if you set that up to use integers, you're probably going to want to use integers in line 10 also, right?
Correct. Right. For this, like, I mean, technically, these don't have to be the same, right? So, like, I can say ham, cheese, right? Turkey, whole wheat, right? And then I can call this ham and cheese, right? And then down here, like, but this doesn't help. Like this, like add ham, cheese, like I would expect that, like I'm building a sandwich here, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But so yeah, but you can call these anything you can think of, but you want them to be descriptive and tell the story, right? So like I could, if I want to get more just like I could say num1 add, num2 add, right?
Mhm.
Malt1 add, or num1 malt and num2 malt, right? And this tells me specifically where they're going, right? So like if I saw num1 malt inside my add function when I'm reading the code, like that may make me raise my eyebrow and say maybe someone put it in the wrong spot,
Sure. Yep.
right? But now like this is telling me exactly where I think everything should be going, right? And these do not have to line up with the same name as these up here, right? Same thing, I could call these ham and cheese and turkey and whole wheat if I wanted to, they just don't help tell the story. But now this is telling me that the first number I put in is going to be the first number in my addition function, this is going to be the second number in my addition function, and the same thing for multiply, right? And then down here I've got 5, 5, 10, 10, and they have to, like, they will always be in the same order, right? So whatever order it asks for up here, you have to give it to it, give it the function call down here, right? And so I still get 110. But I will also say, like, for the most part, and after class, if we want to take a look, we can set up like a side breakout room or whatever. And if you want to show me specifically what's confusing you, like if you're doing the application, we're limited in how much help we can give. But I can still take a peek at it and see if I can't explain it better, looking at what you're looking at that's actually giving you a hard time.
Okay. And I can come up with an example next time that isn't actually the test, but it will help me understand how to do the test. I don't know why I get confused in line 22, the number 5 is being pulled into line number 9, the first one, right?
Yep.
That makes sense to me, but then how does number 1, how does that number 1 play into it? The function from line 1? Where does that
So
number 1 get pulled in?
it goes like this, right? So 10, 10, right? And then what happens is on the next line, this becomes 5 and this becomes 5, right? And then up here, basically like once this function, so I'm calling, so just like I am calling this function right here, I am calling this function up here on line 12, right? I'm calling add, and then I'm giving it 5 and 5. Right, and then this becomes 5 plus 5, and that's what it returns. So it returns 10. And then so basically this turns into 10. And then the same thing here. I'm now calling multiply, and I'm giving it 10 and 10. And then we call multiply up here, and I get 10 and 10. So this becomes 10 and 10, and it returns 100. And so this becomes 10 plus 100, right? So this, when we do this, so like this resolves, right? So this function with these two parameters put into it, and these params are the equivalent of 5 and 5, it resolves to 10, right? And this resolves to 100. And then this function right here, add and multiply, returns 10 plus 100. It does the math and it returns 110.
Okay. Yeah, it seems really clear right here in front of me. And then when you're gone and I'm trying to do it for some reason, it's like, what? This isn't making sense. So if I can't figure it out by Monday, I'll come with an example that maybe you can explain it to me. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yep. So, and I'm also going to show you, this is a site that helps out quite a bit while you're still learning how to, how to debug. And this is called pythontutor.com. You can use it for Python, use it for JavaScript. And we can take a look here, and let me just grab all of this here real quick. And let me clean the comments out of it just to make it a little easier to read over here. All right, and we don't need this one. All right, so pull this out of console. All right, let's visualize the execution. All right, so this will execute in 11 steps. So we start up here on line 1, right? And the computer is going to start loading the functions into memory, right? So add is now saved into the global memory, right? And this is, if add gets called, this is the function that it'll retrieve. Now it does the same thing for multiply, right? They're both saved as functions. The computer knows what they are. And then we've got this, and now finally on our 4th step, like we're getting down to our function call, right? And so these 3 functions are saved into memory, right? So num1 add is 5, num2 add is 5, num1 mult is 10, num2 mult is 10, right? And now we're going to feed that into this function, right? And it's going to call add and pass through the 5 and 5, and it's going to return 10, right? And then it's going to call multiply, and it's going to pass through 10 and 10, and it's going to return 100. And then lastly, we're going to return the 10 plus 100, and the final return value becomes 110. And so if you've ever got some code and it's running through some steps and you're not sure what's happening on the individual steps, this is a great tool to come in here and see what your code looks like when it executes one step at a time.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I will be console logging for half an hour trying to just figure out exactly what's happening. But this looks like this could save a lot of time. Thank you.
Yeah. And the other thing too is, like, if you're console logging for a half hour, you've maybe gone a little too far. Like, get one part to work and know that it's working before you move to the next step. So that way, when something does go wrong, you can always go back a step and you've kind of got like a save point versus like having to possibly go back 2, 3, 4, 5 steps and not knowing exactly which one is the broken one.
Good advice. I'll see if I can follow that. Thank you.
It's easy to like swim out into the deep end sometimes.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, thank you. I'll get better at that.
Okay, so any other questions about higher order functions or any of the stuff that we just discussed? Any questions about anything in general? Meaning of life? All right, so let's go ahead and pick a challenge here. And we finished with Fizz Buzz. So let's go ahead and jump to Camel Case. And so I'll fork that. We'll do the prep work. There's only 4 tonight, so we'll probably just do one team. Like I won't split you out into pairs. And I don't even know that we need to go into a breakout room. Like I'll just let someone else take over the screen sharing, and you can work through the problem in the main room, and then we'll move from there. All right, so let's go ahead. Fork it. Instructions here. Okay, so there are a couple of variable naming conventions in programming. There are camel case and snake case. The JavaScript language subscribes to camel case. Camel case is a naming convention for variables that contain multiple words. The entire first word in the variable's name is lowercase. Every subsequent word's first letter is capitalized. There are no spaces or underlines between words. They are combined together. Right, so if we had a first name, right, so like as the example, we've been writing it like this for 2 weeks now, not snake case with the underscore in between. That would be if you were writing Python. In this challenge, you'll write a function that takes in a snake case argument and converts the sentence to camel case convention. All right. So let's go ahead and we've got our examples down here. And I'm actually going to add an extra one here. All right. And so, yes, when it's snake case and it's all capitals, it's actually called screaming snake case. And so we'll make sure that we're controlling for something when we're given extra uppercase letters as well. So we know that we're going to get one parameter, which is a string of a snake case sentence. We'll just call it a string written in snake case. And we're going to return one thing, which is a string written in camel case. All right, example is C below. Okay, so some things here to think about. Like we'll write some pseudocode here, right? So I need to isolate each word from the others. All right, so we know if we have a string and we want to isolate the words, so we could possibly use .split for that. And then once we have split our string into an array, I need to iterate through each word and take a certain action depending on the index value of the word. right? And that is because we are going to treat the first word different than every other word in there, right? So this one is going to be treated a specific way. Every other word, no matter if there's one more word or a million more words, those will all be treated the same, but this one we have to do something special for, right? So that is all right. So any questions on how I explain this? So I'm going to dump this into the intro to coding. I should be able to put the prep and this hopefully in the chat. Can, so that's in there. All right, so I am going to pause the recording. All right, everyone, it is 7:18 p.m. We are back from the camel case challenge. The group got a working solution. So I'm going to go ahead and go over this. And my solution will be a little bit different in the end because I added an extra case that makes things a little bit more difficult here. But we can get the general solution for the other stuff first, and then I'll show you how we can make this extend this so that we can take different types of or more complex types of data. All right, so first thing we're going to do here is we want to take a look at our input, right? So let's go ahead, we'll run console.log input. Again, my name is Kramer, so I've got a single string here and it is in snake case. So I know that I want to basically split this into an array. So right inside my console.log, I'm going to split it. And I believe that I'm going to want to do this on the underscore here. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right, that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take this out of the console.log and we'll say let, we'll just call it split string equals this. All right. And now I want to be able to access each of the individual parts of my, or each individual element of my array. So each of these strings. So let's go ahead and write a for loop. So we'll say for let I equals 0, I less than split string dot length, and then whoops, I plus plus. And then let's go ahead and console.log split string. And then I want to access each individual element. So I'll do that with bracket notation using my iterator. All right, so there, my name is Kramer. Now, we talked about this yesterday, where we can control where we start iterating, where we stop iterating, and how we iterate. Now, with the base solution of this, I want to make sure that the first word is all lowercase. And because I'm going to treat this one different than every other string or every other element in my array, I don't actually want to start counting at 0 on this one. I want to start counting at 1. Right. And so that helps me get away from that. All right. So now I know I'm iterating the correct way. And so my next part to solve, right? So it's, if we're solving this in order, it's how do I get my string into an array? Oops. How do I loop through my array? Right, and I've got that solved. And so now I need to figure out how do I get just the first letter, right? And so we do MDN string slice. All right. So usually when we talk about slice, there is also substring available, so we can use that method. But so far we can see like we visited the array.slice, but we haven't checked out string.slice yet. And it works pretty much the exact same way. Right, we can give it a starting index position, and optionally we can give it an ending index position. Right, so index end is optional, but we have to have a start. So if we do something like this, so we could say dot slice, right? And if I go 1 here, let's see what we get. Right, so I get all of these, right? So this is each word minus the first word. So I know that I can leave this stuff alone, right? If I start at 0, I get the whole word, right? And if I give it that optional ending index, and I do believe, so the index of the first character to include the return substring, right? So this basically, and this is very common when we're dealing with these, is that the start is inclusive, right? So if I give it a 0, it's going to start at the 0. However, the end is exclusive, right? So include, exclude. So if I just give it a 1, it means it'll include the 0 index. It'll stop at the 1, and it technically stops right before the 1 and excludes it from what I'm going to return, right? So I can say 0, 1. Let's go ahead and run this again, right? And there's my first letters of each word, right? And so I want this to uppercase, right? And I'm still right inside my console.log. I'm watching it change step by step here, right? So there's my NIK. And then let me grab this, and we'll say plus, right, this. And when I did this earlier, all I need to do is get rid of this 0 and this 1. So I start counting at the 1. And so basically ignore the first letter, start giving me everything in the string from the second letter on. So the first index position, remember, so 0 and then 1. So even though it's 1, we're starting in the second position, and all the way till the end. Right? And so let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like. Right? So this looks pretty good to me. So name is Kramer. Each of these are uppercase. I've ignored my first word in each of these. And so now all I need to do is, instead of console.logging this, is I need to assign the value of the element to this new value, right? And so if I say split string I is equal to this, right? And then, so let's go ahead and come down here and we'll say console.log, and I'm outside of my loop now, split string. That looks pretty good to me, right? And now I know that I need to glue it all back together, right? So basically now I've isolated first letter made it uppercase. Isolated all letters besides first. And did nothing to it. And then joined, or we'll say added. We assign the value of element to the uppercase first letter and lowercase following letters, right? And so now we're arrayed back into a single string. All right, and so to do that, I'm going to use join. Right, and I believe if I just give it an empty string here, it should take all of that and push it to one word. Right, and it does. Still not passing yet because I'm inside my console.log. So let's go ahead and return this. Now I get my true. Right, and if I do that for these, right, I get true for all of these. Now if I do it for this, I should fail. And I do, and it's false. So let's go ahead and take a look at this one. So let's take this out of the return and we're going to do console.log this. Right, and so what I get is everything is still uppercase and it's all been smashed together. Right, so that makes it pretty hard to read. So let's do some additional changes up here to make sure that I am getting this, even if I get different styles of formats here, right? And so the first thing I need to do is I need to edit my first letter, right? So I'm actually going to have to go back to a count of 0 here, right? So that I get everything. So console.log split string I, and I'm just going to comment that out and comment this out for right now. Right, I like screaming cakes. And now I'm going to, because I'm dealing with this one as well, I'm going to need some conditional logic. Right, so now I can say if I is triple equal to 0, whoops, right, I can then say to do console.log split string I to lowercase. Right, and we want the whole thing, not just the first letter, right? So we'll just do this for example. Right, so now I'm getting this to lowercase, right? And so I can take this out of my console.log and I can say split string I is equal to split string I to lowercase. Right, I don't have that console.log anymore. Right, so now I'm in lowercase. Okay, and from here I can say this, and all I need to do is take this second slice and say to lowercase here as well. All right, and I believe that should make it look a lot better. Whoops, and that. Right, so whoops, so I've still got a capital I here. So because I didn't put this in an else, so let's move this up into the else. That looks better to me. I'm gonna get rid of this triple. Looks weird. All right, I like screaming sneak kicks, so that to me looks good. And so let's take this out of the console log. We'll put it back into the return. We've got a true now. And let's make sure that we didn't break that it was working for the previous functions here. Not all true. All right. So again, the initial solution is to basically tackle the basic problem if we're only getting snake case, but in the event that we ever receive screaming snake case, which is snake case where all the letters are all uppercase, we can still convert that back to camel case. Any questions on how I solve this?
What would have happened if on line 34, you just put all of it to lowercase at that point?
It wouldn't, so I could put it all to lowercase right there, and then I don't need it right there. It wouldn't technically make much of a difference. I mean, well, and actually when I say that, I'm trying to think, because I think you're right there, where maybe I can move that up there and then I don't need this. So let's give that a try real quick. So if I say dot to lowercase here, right? And then if I take this out, so I can take this whole thing out. And you can probably take this out then as well. And then turn this back to this. Let's go ahead and give it a shot. What did I go? Line 40. So I've got 1 too many. Yes, I've got 1 too many because I didn't get rid of the last part of the if else. There we go. So yes, that is a better way to do it. Is just to lowercase it right from the very beginning. Nice catch. Any other questions on how this got solved? All right, so it is 7:34. So let's go ahead and take a 6-minute break. I'm gonna pause everything, stretch your legs, do whatever you need to do, and we'll kick back off into the next challenge at 7:40. All right, everyone, 7:40 p.m. Central Time. Welcome back from the break. Let's go, sorry. Any questions on anything we've covered so far? Anything that you thought of over the break or anything like that? Okay, let's go ahead and grab another challenge here. All right, so we're going to do high score next. This will be a good one because we're going to do some work with arrays now. All right, so whoops, I've got one too many equals right there. So we're going to write a method that takes in an integer array of student test scores and returns only the highest score, right? And notice how they're not necessarily in any specific order. So we need to figure out what the highest score is for our array, or the highest score that is contained in our array. So basically the max value within the array. Now, I do believe, once again, there are some built-ins that would allow us to say, do this in like a single line of code, but we aren't going to use those to solve the challenge, right? So I think array has, maybe it doesn't. I thought there was something in here that would return the just automatically like the largest value in there. I could be thinking about a different language, or I may not just be remembering the what it's specifically called. But even without any of that, we're not going to use a built-in to get through this one. All right, so we're going to get one parameter pushed in, which is an array of integers containing test scores. All right, and we're going to return one thing, which is going to be an integer, the highest score array. All right, and we'll say see below. All right, now for pseudocode, right? So I know I'm going to need to check each of the values in here and figure out which one is the largest one. All right, and so okay, and then all right, so that's it for the pseudocode. So let me go ahead. I will drop these into the chat. Also put it in here. All right, and let me go ahead and pause the recording. All right, everyone, welcome back from the high score challenge. The group got a solution, so we're going to go ahead and go over it together in class now. All right, so let's jump in, and as always, we're going to console.log student scores. All right, let's right from the get-go, we want to know what we're looking at here. All right, so that looks good to me. So I know that I'm going to need to iterate through this and examine each score. So I've already got an array, so I don't have to split a string or anything like that. I'm just going to start looping through my array. I also need a way to store my highest score. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say let high score, or we'll say highest score equal 0. This wouldn't necessarily be the best choice, like if we had some examples with negative numbers in here, but we'll just assume that everything's going to be positive. And even if everything was a bunch of zeros in here, I don't know how you score negative on a test. You can spell your name wrong and get all the questions wrong. But like, even if this was a bunch of zeros, 0 would still be the highest score. So we'll treat this as the jumping off point. And so let's go ahead and start our loop. So we'll say for let I equal 0, I less than student scores dot length, and we'll say I plus plus. All right, so now let's go ahead and take this and we'll move that up in here. And to look at the individual elements of our array, we're gonna add our iterator to it in bracket notation. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. All right, so there's all of our numbers. So now I need some conditional logic. So if my current score, right, so I can say my current score is greater than my high score needs to become the same as my current score. So we'll say if student scores I is greater than highest score, and we'll say highest score is equal to student, whoops. Student score I, all right? And so this is closing my if statement, this is closing my for loop, right? And now we can do console.log highest score. Now let's take a look at it. Oops, student scores is not defined because I said scores instead of, there we go. Scores. And I still got another typo. It's student, not student, or student. There we go. So 92 and 97 getting false because I'm console.logging instead of returning it. So let's go ahead and return it. Right, and there's my true. So this is how I would expect this problem to be solved by the students in my class. I will show you another way of solving this here real quick though. And basically that is using the sort function. All right. And so this is a built-in, right? And this is, and I'll show you why I try and stay away from these. And like I always steer everyone away from it, is because a sort function actually has, so the built-in method sort needs a compare function to basically do this. So the compare function is optional. But a compare function that defines a sort order, the return value should be a number whose sign indicates the relative order of the two elements. Negative if A is less than B, positive if A is greater than B, and 0 if they are equal. Not a number is treated as 0. The function is called with the following arguments. All right. So let's go ahead, and if you didn't understand a word of that, let's go ahead and walk through and see what it looks like here. All right. So we'll come back up here and we'll say console.log student scores. All right, and there's my arrays. And now I can do dot sort, right? Just dot sort with no function in there. And now it is doing it from smallest to largest, right? And I don't have a way to always just automatically grab the last value. Like -1 works when we're doing like some of the built-in methods, but it doesn't work just as like an index value. You can't use -1, -2, -3 and count from that. So what I need to do is a compare function, which is AB, my fat arrow, and then I can't remember which one it is, so we'll play around with it and see if we get what we're looking for here. All right, so that's still doing it that way. Let's try this. Okay, so that is in a different order. B plus A. No, that's still in a weird order. B minus A. I always get these confused, which is why I don't use it. Hey, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Right? And so now box 0. All right, 92, 97. Pull this out of the console.log. Let's return it. There's my true. Right, so if I had to do this in production level code, this is the answer that I would go with it. But by doing this, again, we're losing out on practicing how to access elements in an array. We're losing another repetition of writing a for loop and making sure that we're doing it correctly, and kind of figuring out all of the stuff that's happening behind the scenes in a function like this, right? Like this just does it for you. It's magic. You have to trust that it works, but you don't necessarily know why it works. All right, so this is the answer that I'm looking for. All right, so let me throw this back up here at the top. But that is an example of how we would use a built-in function to solve the same problem. So any question on either way that I just solved this? Okay, so let's go ahead and move to our last challenge for the evening. All right, so we just did high score. And so now we're going to look at, we'll do 2 strikes. It will be the next one. All right, so for 2 strikes, we're going to write a method that takes in a string array of license plate numbers. The method should return a string array of any plate numbers that appeared at least twice. If none of the plate numbers appeared more than once, the method should return an empty array. All right, so let's look at the examples down here. And I know it says a string array. We'll just call it an array. It doesn't matter if it's a string or numbers. The way this will get written, it'll take everything. All right, so this one is, again, so this one is going to be a level up from all of the ones that we've handled up until this point, and I'll explain why. So here we've got all the different plates, right? So you see 3, 4, 5 appears here and it appears here. So we should get an array with 3, 4, 5. Right here, there are no duplicates. And so as we just get an empty array. Now, lastly, here we have it with 3 occurrences of 2, but we only want the 2 represented in there once. All right, so it shouldn't have like all of the 2s in there. Okay, so why this one is going to be more difficult is because we are going to solve this using a nested loop. So we're going to have to write a outer loop that does one thing, and then inside of that loop, there's going to be another loop doing something else, right? And that is because we're going to have to loop through this array and take one of the values and isolate it, and then compare it to all of the other values in the array. And then once we have compared that one, we then need to discard it, pick up the next value, and then again, compare it to all of the elements and the other elements in the array until we move through all of our elements in the array. And so the outside loop is basically grabbing the first element, and then the inside loop is taking that first element and checking it against all of the other ones. All right. And so this one is going to be trickier. Along with, there's going to be some other things happening here that we want to make sure that we're only putting it in here once and not multiple times. And so we're going to have to figure out how we solve for that as well. So we are going to be getting one thing, which is an array of license plates, possibly containing duplicates. All right, we're going to return one thing, which is an array of all plates that appeared more than once. All right. Example, we'll say see below. Now for pseudocode, we're going to need 2 loops to solve this problem. And outside loop should be taking first element of the array or the last, I just say the first, and then isolate. And inside loop should be taking that isolated element and checking it against all other elements for duplicates. Once the isolated element has been checked against all other elements, it is discarded, and the next element in line is selected. The inside loop will then, let's say, right? Outside loop selects the next element in line. All right, the inside loop will then repeat the process of checking it against all remaining elements. All right, so if a duplicate is found, we need to then store that duplicate in the results array. And if there are more than one duplicate, we need to prevent us from pushing duplicate numbers into our result array. And then all elements have been inspected against each other. We will want to return our results array. All right, so it is 8:24. We can handle this a couple of ways because we're just down to a couple people in class here at this point. If you'd like to, I can give you the rest of the class to work on this, and then we can go over the solution on Monday. Or if you'd prefer, I can just walk us through the solution, and I'll ask questions and we'll work through it together. But that way you'll have the solution at the end of class today. Any thoughts on either of those options?
I mean, me personally, I'd rather we kind of try to work through it together, but I mean,
Okay. Would you like me to drive, or would one of you like to drive? As far as when I say drive, do you want me to keep screen sharing and I'll be typing and we'll discuss what to do next, or would one of you like to type everything?
I don't mind taking a stab at it, I guess.
Okay.
Go,
So
Sean.
let me drop this in the chat here for us.
Okay.
It's going to yell at me and say the messages are too big. So there's that part. That part, and then here is this part. And then I'll also take, if you're on Slack, let me drop the whole thing into Slack. All right, and I will stop screen sharing here.
All right.
All right, everyone, it is 8:48 p.m. So this will be the last challenge. So we're getting back from 2 strikes. The group was able to get a working solution. So we'll go over in class. All right, so again, we're going to walk through this step by step. All right, so we're going to do console.log plates. Right, and there are my arrays. Now, as I had mentioned before, we're going to need 2 loops to solve this problem. Right, and the first loop is basically going to be plucking an element off of the array, holding it aside, and then the inside loop is going to be comparing it against all of the other elements in the array. Once that inside loop is done executing, the first element that's been plucked off is just going to be discarded, right? We don't need it anymore. We've permanently shortened the array by 1, right? So each time the inside loop goes through, it's going to be a little bit smaller each time. Now, that being said, because we're impacting the length of the array with our outside loop, this would not be a good case for using a for loop, because we're saying typically with a for loop, we're going to continue to count as long as I is less than the length of the array, but we're actually going to be changing the length of the array. So it's going to give us a screwy count when we do that. So what a better way to do that would be is to use a while loop. And we can keep iterating through our while loop as long as there is something left in the array to iterate. So we'll base it off the length of the array, but we're going to put it inside a while loop. And so at the top level, we could say while what is this? Plates dot length is greater than 0, right? And so now I can say plates dot shift, which will take shift, removes the first element from an array and returns it. Right, let's go ahead and wrap this in a console.log. And that. Right, and I know that we're getting to the end of our function, right? Because we're console.logging our functions down here. That's what these undefines are. We're actually moving towards the end of the loop. I didn't write an infinite loop here where it just keeps going for forever. Now, relying on a previous lesson, we know that we have truthy and falsy, and 0 is falsy. So the number 0 is falsy. So technically I could clean this up a little bit, and I don't need this greater than 0 because every number is a truthy value, but the number 0 is actually a falsy value. So if I do this, I get the exact same thing, right? Because while the length is greater than 0, it's truthy. Once the length is equal to 0, it's falsy, and we punch out. All right. And so that's just a little hack there. Okay, so now that we're inside our inside loop, or I'm sorry, inside of our outside loop, so our first loop, our while loop, we need to take that first value and we need to assign it to a variable so that we can then check it against the other values in the array. So we'll pull this out of the console.log and we'll say, we'll just call it let plate to compare equals plates.shift. All right. Now I need to write my inside loop. And whereas the while loop is impacting the length of the array, the inside for loop won't be. And so we can write a for loop for the inside loop, and we don't have to worry about our count getting screwed up because the length of the array will only change while the outside loop is executing. And then each time the inside loop runs, the length of the array will be 1 shorter than it was the previous time that it ran. So for this, we can say for let I equals 0. well, I is less than plates dot length and I plus plus. So we're still incrementing. Right, so now we could do something like this. So we could say console.log plates I, and when we do this, let's go ahead and run this. Right, so now notice, so we get 345A 345A 34A 3434, right? So like we are, it is getting shorter by one each time it iterates through, right? So when we look at this, so the one's gone the first time, then we get 345 AU 345, and then the next time through we get these three, and then the next time through we get these two, and then the last time through we just get the one. All right, and so that looks good to me as well. So now I need to do some comparative logic. And actually, I apologize, I missed a step up here. I need to, because from here, write a method that takes an array of license plate numbers. The method should return a string array of any plate numbers that appeared at least twice. If none of the plate numbers appeared more than once, the method should return an empty array. So I know I need an array up here. So let's do let result array equal an empty array. And then down here, we can return result array. All right, and because now if nothing is found as a duplicate, we're just going to return an empty array, which would take care of the second one here. And if we do find things, now we need to start writing some conditional logic that is going to compare our plates, basically the current plate that we're looking at in our inside loop, to the plate to compare that has been isolated with the outside loop. All right, and if we find some duplicates, then we can push that into the result array. All right, so now we can say plates I triple equal to plate to compare, and let's see if we get some true and false values in. All right, so false, 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 true, false, 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 and some truths, right? So this is what I'm looking for. So I can take this right out of the console.log and I can replace this with an if. And now I can say, basically result array dot push, whoops, plates I. All right, and now let's go ahead and just console.log result array down here. Now let's take a look at this. All right, so I've got a duplicate in here. This one's empty. I've got, do I have an extra? Oh, it's because I'm not doing any comparison down here, so I don't really need this console.log. Let's do that. All right, so this is good. This is passing. This is what I'm looking for. This is passing. We have an issue right here, right? So we have multiple twos. So as we're going through here, we are running into an issue where even if it's already represented inside of the result array, we're still pushing in additional copies of it. And that's not what we're looking for. We just, if it doesn't matter if there's one duplicate, if there's a dozen duplicates, we just need the plate in there one time. And the way that we can clean that up is we can add some additional logic to when we push that in there, right? And so we can use a built-in method called dot includes. So we can say if result array dot includes plates I, right? This will return true. Now, the way this is written is because we're saying if plates I is triple equal to plates compare and result array already contains plates I, this is true, then push it. And that's not what we want. We're actually looking for the opposite of this. And the way that we would basically reverse the polarity on this or take the inverse of it is to add our bang operator. So now this, in plain English, this would say like excludes, right? So if plates I is not inside of results array and plates I is equal to plates to compare, then push it in. So this should help us get rid of all of these duplicates, because the first time it finds a duplicate, this would be true. Every other time it finds a duplicate for the same value, this part will now be false, and the whole thing will resolve to false. Right, and so now we've cleared that up. All right, so any questions on how we solve this one? Going once, going twice. Okay,
Don't
so
take our silence as we completely understand it. I just need to process it, I think.
no worries. Yep, and like I said, so this is the last class for this week. We'll be back on Monday. If there's things that you didn't ask me today, I mean, one, you can always Slack me. But outside of that, come to class with questions on Monday. You can see the class size is down to the people that are going to take it the distance. We've got plenty of time to answer questions, and the more you guys talk, honestly, the more interactive it is for me, the better it is for me. Because if not, I'm just here talking to the void and doing like algorithm challenges that I've already solved 10 times. So
Sounds good.
yeah, ask lots of questions.
Will do.
All right. Well,
You're gonna post this code, right? What you just.
yep, everything
Okay.
will get posted tonight or probably tomorrow morning.
Okay.
But yeah, outside of that, I don't have anything else. I'm going to turn off the recording.